All right, and welcome everyone to the first edition of the Hive Thrive Community Hour, where we want to talk about Hive, what works, what doesn't work, and solutions. Because, it's fine to complain, but we got to have solutions or we just keep complaining. And that's just the way we roll. So today we're going to welcome on Blocktrades. I think everybody probably knows Blocktrades, unless you're really new to the platform. And of course, my co-host, Buckcoins, is here. And as you just heard, before the recording went on, so I'll repeat it for it. He is the guy that created the artwork that is currently there for the show. And thank you for doing that, Buckcoins. How you doing today?
Yeah, I'm doing really well. It's very cold where I'm at. I'm in Bulgaria, but they have a sauna and a pool. So I did and they have a ping pong table, which, I've been playing with my son, so that's been nice.
Oh, that makes nice indoor activity.
Yeah, exactly. With the kids, you gotta really trick them into getting off screens for sure.
Yeah, at least for a little while, rest their eyes and do something else, use their brains. And with that, Blocktrades, welcome.
Thanks. Hey, everyone.
Nice to see you here today. I know we tried a couple of weeks ago and you got snowed in. You'd almost think it was winter in your area.
Yeah, it's still kind of cold here, but it's getting better.
Yeah, it's getting a little milder here. We're up in the 30s today, so got a heat wave rolling. And Blue Robo has just asked what the show is. It's the Hive Thrive Community Hour. So Blocktrades, we wanted you to come on today, not only for the community to get to know you a little bit better, because there might be somebody who doesn't know you. And the other thing was, we'd love to talk about the DHF with you.
Sounds good.
So how would you like to first just tell us a little bit about what you'd like us to know about you?
Okay, I guess I'm one of the lead developers for the Hive blockchain nowadays. Primarily worked on what's called generally the core area, which is the software that does the primary processing for transactions, and also developing software tools for second layer development as well. And that's kind of been my focus for the longest time now, is we've been working on building up second layer, which makes it easier for more programmers to work on Hive without having to touch the more troublesome part of the code. So
okay, so I know that. Oh, I'm sorry. Did you?
No, that's what I was gonna say. I don't know if you wanted more general knowledge or just my specific things I'm doing in Hive.
I'm a strong believer in people just sharing what they're comfortable with.
Okay, that's fine.
So we'll kind of go to the heart of the matter here. One of the things that caught our attention was you took some action with the DHF a few weeks ago. Did you want to give us any conversation about what you did and maybe even why, what your reasoning was?
Yeah, so I voted up the refund proposal. I'm getting a little feedback. I don't know if I can figure out how to cut that back. Maybe I can. I don't know. We'll just go with it. It actually just seems to trigger at the beginning, and then it's okay. So I voted up the refund proposal, and for those that don't know, the refund proposal is basically the barrier that other proposals have to pass in order to get funding. So if nobody voted up the refund proposal, then basically every proposal would automatically get funded as soon as a single person voted for it. So we don't have a hard barrier you have to pass. The refund proposal is like this floating barrier that any proposal has to pass to have a chance to be funded. Even if they pass the refund proposal, doesn't mean they'll necessarily be funded, because there's only a certain amount of funding that's supplied every day. And if other proposals that are higher in the ranking have more votes, all that money, then they still won't get funded. But in general, there's typically not as many proposals as there are funds available daily. So if somebody's able to get past the refund proposal, that proposal will typically will start receiving funds at that point. And so it's the reason why I voted up the refund proposal at that time. I guess first let me sort of set a little background. I haven't voted up the refund proposal for the longest time. There was a time in the past where I was voting for it. But generally, I'm sort of in favor of more projects being developed and more work being done on Hive. And I know there's a lot of disagreement on how much money should be spent on and how efficiently the projects are. And I get all that. And, we all have different opinions on that to some extent. I don't agree with every proposal that gets funded either, I should say, is a starting point. And in fact, that was in fact the trigger for me this time. There was a proposal I was particularly opposed to for a lot of different reasons. And so I didn't really want to vote up the refund proposal, but that was pretty much I basically exhausted my options for anything else to do except to vote up the refund proposal. So I did that, and did some discussions with other voters and stakeholders, and eventually was able to remove my refund proposal vote once I was more satisfied with the state of affairs.
Yeah, your vote is kind of a huge sledgehammer, isn't it?
It is. I don't have a lot of control over it. It's either on or off. It's no in between. So I could only make a big vote. I couldn't make a selected vote that just stopped that one proposal and didn't stop all the rest.
Right. So you were able to kind of tone it down a little bit and let some of the others slip by the level.
Yeah. So once I didn't have to vote, I removed my vote, and then stuff got back again. But I don't have you can't do a partial vote. I have to do a full vote, and my full vote just moves the refund proposal very, very high.
Well, funny you just mentioned that. We've got a question in the audience. So I'll ask that, and then I'll yield the mic to Buckcoins. Rion Webb has asked, why posts have upvote and downvote that don't happen to each proposal?
I'm sorry, I didn't really understand it.
I'm
what was the question?
Thinking that she's asking why it doesn't have the ability to upvote and downvote on each proposal.
You can upvote every proposal. You just can't downvote every proposal. So maybe that's what he's saying is why you can't. It's actually been proposed before, and I've considered it too. I threw it out there as an idea as well to be able to downvote proposals. I'd say there's pluses and minuses to it, honestly, the pros and cons, whatever you want to call it. On the plus side, yeah, it would allow you to very much target a particular proposal that you didn't want to, you're opposed to. On the other hand, the whole process of the DHF is sort of a compromise system to some extent between people who want to fund projects and people who don't. And we could have done it the other way, but then it's the problem is it tends that way. I think would tend to discourage spending because you could target the things. There's kind of like a thing now where if you want to, if you're willing to accept a proposal that you would normally downvote and it gets funded because you don't want to also defund other proposals that you're in favor of. So the system we have now is sort of more encourages spending because you compromise and accept that some proposal gets funded in order for yours to get funded. Now you could take the opposite view too, and you want as little spent as possible. And then I think the downvoting would be probably the better system because it seems like on the face of it at least, more likely discourage funding. So as far as why we did it the way we did it, I would say there was it wasn't a particular thought process we had when we started. We were just looking, so maybe taking a step back. So that's kind of the two pros and cons of those two systems. And like I said, I don't know the one's better than the other. It sort of depends on your view on how much money should be spent, I guess. But as to why we did it the way we did, probably like I said, let's take a step back and look at why the DHF got at it. And honestly, it was my idea for the DHF, not how it works in general, but to add it to Steam. And at that time, what happened was we had Steam at the company, which was supposed to be doing development for Steam. And they really, they weren't doing much. They were doing very, very little, to be honest, and stuff wasn't happening. And I was kind of disappointed with the speed of development. And there was really no system to encourage anyone else to do development because Steam had basically had such a high stake. They had an interest, at least theoretically, in developing the software, although they weren't doing much. But no one else could really be justified the amount of labor involved. And plus, Steam, it was kind of in your way anyways, because they generally didn't want you to do anything for them. So my idea was, and since they weren't spending money, and I knew Ned did not want to spend money, I proposed to Ned that we add a way that could fund other developers. And that's really why the DHF got created. And at the time, honestly, I was also thinking of using it to help fund some of my developers to work on Steam. So that's why. And then as far as the mechanics of how we chose, I'd worked on a previous blockchain called Shares, and it had something very similar to DHF. It had a funding mechanism built in where it could fund people. And so we basically looked at that system, basically copied a lot of the details of it. It's not exactly the same, but they're very, very similar. We made a couple changes that I thought were improvements, but I kept it to a minimum because we had to do this on a we had to write the code for the DHF on a relatively cheap budget. So we weren't investing a huge amount of money in it. So I feel like I'm trying to remember how much we charged for it. I think we only charged like $50,000 for the entire thing to develop it and stuff. And one of the big changes we made that I think is most significant was that we pay in a stable coin instead of the coin of the native coin. And that has a really big advantage because what I saw in the BitShares world, and some of this is experience I learned watching how their version of the DHF worked. I forget what it's called right offhand, but the way it worked there, because it was paid in the native coin price could go up or down tremendously. So somebody would wind up either getting paid way too much for what they're doing or way too little, depending on the coin price at any time. So this left the developers unhappy or happy, or left once either the developers or everybody who was voting for it were unhappy at any given time generally. So we saw that I decided that a stable coin approach would work better. So that's why we pay an HBD instead of Hive.
That makes sense. While you were talking, several people have asked about why not a slider, maybe not necessarily a downvote, but a sliding vote, which would have meant that you could have used less of a sledgehammer. Yeah,
we certainly could have. I mean, it certainly could have been done. And again, we just took the method that was used in BitShares. We didn't over-engineer it. We didn't spend a lot of time on it to make it. I took what I thought were the obviously better things. And again, the slider approach, it has goods and bads to it too. Yeah, it gives you more control as the individual voter, but it also, when you get to this compromise kind of situation, it's like the sledgehammer approach means that I won't casually just. I have to accept. For instance, let's take me. Say I only wanted to fund one particular project, and I don't want to fund anything else. If I had more control, I might be able to easily lever to do that. But as it is, because my vote is all or nothing, is so big, I wind up knocking out stuff I'd want to fund and I don't want to fund at the same time. So it makes me a little more hesitant to just use that kind of power. I mean, honestly, I'm hesitant to use it anyways for the most part, because I do kind of want to get the community to the point where, it's making more decisions and I'm making less. But, it's somewhat a long-term project.
I think most people understood that, and it seemed to actually create conversation. Usually when stuff like that happens on the chain, it creates controversy. This time it was conversation. And with that, Buckcoins, I know you've got some questions. And wait, what question Rian had asked, we'll circle back to it when we're talking about the mechanics of the proposals. Go ahead, Buckcoins.
Yeah. It's definitely interesting to hear your point of view, and it brought up a lot of these ideas that did come up, or points that were being made after you did the return proposal. One of them you're coming close to touching into it, so maybe I'll just kind of dig in a little bit more. One argument that I saw in a few places was that it was a mistake to fork over the Ninja mine and make the DHF, because it was fake money to begin with, and it was like inappropriate money to begin with, and so it should have been left like over there on that chain, and we should be doing funding internally from I don't know, real money. I guess the argument that I was sort of seeing was that the DHF is kind of like printing money, and it causes too much sell pressure on Hive. So, yeah, what is your opinion on that? Is that, do you agree with that? Or?
No, not really. But let me take it. There's actually 2 points there, I think, in terms of the money, right? So there's the Ninja Mine. Basically, the Steam at stake was moved into there, but there's also a separate supply of money there, which is money which is created through inflation. Well, we call it inflation, but basically a certain amount of money gets printed and put into the DHF all the time. So there's a steady flow of additional money, and there's also the Steam at basically the same amount that was in the Steam at stake on Steam. We took that amount and put it into the DHF. So they're kind of two separate issues, and I guess let's talk about them separately. So, I mean, we call it fake. If somebody calls it fake money, that to me is just kind of ridiculous. By that definition, all the money in Hive is fake money. We have a protocol. It creates a certain amount of new coins all the time, and this is just the way the system works. Fake or real, that's what you believe in. I think by that definition, also all money is fake, including U.S. dollars. It gets created all the time, but let's so getting away from the fake or real, let's talk about what I guess a lot more people are concerned about, which is sell pressure. So if they're concerned about it from an inflation point of view, the DHF that was the Steam version of the stake that was put in there is not, it's not inflationary. It's a fixed amount. However, there is an inflationary factor. We have inflation throughout our system. We create new money for witnesses. We create new money. The biggest new money is actually created for funding, people's posts and things like that. Basically, the reward system. In terms of that, the DHF amount that it gets normally created is relatively small. I can't remember right offhand, but I feel like it's like 1% of the total. Maybe it's 10%. I can't remember. It's a relatively small amount of the total inflation that we create. I guess it must be 10%. That's got to be of the total. So that means we got 90% created through other sources. So by no means, in my opinion, is it a large sell pressure item in terms of the inflation it creates. Now somebody could say, well, I'm talking about the amount that was put in there versus the steam at stake, which, while a fixed amount, is now flows out over time, right? And so someone could say that amount is the amount. That might be why some people say it, because it was a decent amount. But truthfully, a lot of the DHF that's in there now has actually been raised through various means over time. One of them being just through the HBD stabilizer, which has actually raised quite a bit as time has gone by, because it's a pretty profitable venture in terms of HBD collection. But yeah, I do not think it's a large source of inflation relative to other sources of inflation. And more to the point, I think we really need, Hive as a whole really needs to spend money on development. And so one of the reasons I don't particularly get too concerned about the amount of money that's spent by the DHF is because I personally spend more than the DHF every year since Hive's been operating. And that's on development. I mean, for Hive. So I know just how small the amount that's being spent by Hive on development is compared. I mean, when I'm personally spending more than the entire DHF, that tells me that. And it's not like I think I'm wasting my time with development. I think the money we're spending is very important. So that sort of gives you my view on how much should be spent, and that, in fact, we're kind of lacking right now on how much we're spending.
All right. Well, that's cool. That's interesting. Yeah, I'm definitely hearing this idea that you think that the increased development is the key thing. And yeah, I guess what, I'm sort of trying to play the role of things that I'm hearing in the community and things that also interest me as well. But one of the arguments, and you touched into it when you first started, is that basically the DHF is not being run in a kind of a practical, efficient way. People are saying that it needs to be rethought, that proposals don't have clear return on investments, that the DHF is lacking like being run like a real business that has that expects returns, and the community really feels like it's their money often, and they feel, I guess it is, and so they feel it should be run more responsibly with more oversight, with demonstrated KPIs after a project gets funded, more communication through posts or through dialogues like this that do seem to be, a lot of the projects get funded and then you just don't hear anything. There's several I just kind of scanned through and I went through and looked if they'd had recent posts, and there's just tons of projects that got quite a lot of funding and really do not communicate what they're up to and what they're doing. And so if you like think about, the DHF and what it is in the state that it is, and if it were to be thought of as a rough draft, is there anything that you see that you'd like to see improved or changed? Is there improvements that you are seeking or hoping will come about?
So, yeah, let's start with that question. It's a good question. So, improvements to the DHF. So, from my view, the DHF is sort of like, it is a mechanism for how people can organize to get something done, right? So that's kind of the way I view what money is about too, in general. But specifically, the DHF it's a funding mechanism. So it's like you have things you think should get done. You need to somehow get people to do them. You got to decide what to do, those kind of things. And the DHF is it's sort of a policy making decision at the layer. Now it's not setting policy at the layer of what specifically like the protocol, although it can, right? Because you could decide to fund something that's a protocol change. It's more general purpose in terms than just changes of the protocol, the software. It's generally we'd like to have this, and so let's spend money on this. So this is actually an area I'm very interested in, is this concept of how people decide what to do and how they, voting mechanisms, all these kind of things. And I certainly don't think that the DHF is the best system in the world from that point of view. It's what we got right now. I've actually got a separate project that I've been working on for a while, which is diving deeper into this idea of how you would make decisions on how people will organize and do things. So, but it's a big topic, and it takes a lot of thought and it takes a lot of time. So when you think about if you want to, some of the weaknesses you talked about the DHF there is, there's no uniform reporting of how proposals are. So it's not easy to measure one proposal against the other. A larger problem, actually, in my opinion, is that it's basically making decisions there's several different types of projects in the DHF, but most of them are software development for the most part. There's also some marketing ones as well. And first of all, those are two very different areas. How you do marketing, how you do software development are really almost completely different in terms of how to measure them and things like that. So one of the problems is most people don't have a knowledge about how to measure how well a software project is doing and what it's doing. And so that's the biggest problem, I would say. If we had a problem, it's going to be people understanding exactly what's proposed in a project, what the likely benefits really are, how much work, probably when it gets to the problem is how much work, how difficult the project is it even really feasible? Somebody will promise you something, but how much is it likely that can even really happen? And most of the voters just don't have the knowledge to even successfully answer those kind of questions. So it's the problem, I would say, from the biggest problem we have is in any kind of system like this is to figuring out what's the right thing to do. And you can try to come up with a lot of different voting systems for how to make those kind of decisions as a group, right? So you could have a one-to-one voting system, basically a democracy of some sort. That's actually really difficult for us to do because we don't have an identity-based system, so we don't have any way to know who's who. So we can't really do a democratic system without actually first creating some system that gives identity. And even then, it's problematic. So in this kind of system we have where it's basically a money system because there's different levels at stake, so people have different levels of interest in the success or failures of things, and so we basically got a stake-based voting system, right? It's very similar to the way, in some extent, the way companies do voting. The larger shareholders, you're assumed to have the more weight because you have the most at stake in the gain or loss. Now, the system is different in many ways too, but that's the similarity that really underlies why we have a stake-based voting system. Those two issues. First of all, it's difficult for us to do anything but a stake-based voting system, and second of all, it seems a little fair in the sense of people who have the most stake are most likely going to be wanting to spend the money most efficiently. Obviously, if you don't have much stake, you might just want to spend it on anything because you don't really care. That money isn't that valuable to you. So, I think there's improvements the system can be made, but none easy. I don't spend a lot of time thinking how to improve the DHF. I do spend a lot of time thinking how to come up with a completely new system that does things differently. And that's an active project I have, but I don't know that it would actually replace the DHF even then. I don't know. Maybe it could, but it's not something that's where I'm focused at the moment. So
there's been some questions here along the lines of shouldn't proposals have some kind of report on how development is going every X amount of time? And
maybe.
But input on that. And is it even feasible for it to happen?
Well, it is. I mean, it is certainly feasible. I should say that a lot of projects do actually report, and I keep track of most of the proposals to some extent or another. Not all of them, especially the ones I don't vote for, I don't track as well because I basically have no control over those. Ones that I vote for, I do pay more attention to as a rule. Like there was one guy got voted in a long time ago for a proposal, and I totally disagreed with the proposal, and I didn't even bother to track the work because I knew I had no effect on it. And that's happened a couple times over time. Now, I mean, I could raise a point and, complain about it, but I don't usually bother, to be honest. I kind of figure if you could see them. What's that?
You pick your battles.
Yeah, exactly. So, but the proposals I vote for, I do pay attention to, for sure. And they might not be reporting everything publicly, but you can see things in various ways. You can see what they do in the proposal, in their repositories. You can see when they do releases. They do have reports in various places too. Some of them will report in Mattermost. That's where a lot of the software people are, and there's often reports there. And the other question is, how often should be regular, right? I'm pretty irregular myself in my reporting, and I'm not even have a proposal, of course, but nonetheless, I feel like it's something that should be done, somewhat routinely. But there's been times when it's taken a couple months to make a report. I'm sure probably right now I'm probably into the 2-month range. Now, yeah, I'm not getting money from it right now, so that's another argument. I would probably feel more constrained to make a report otherwise. But it's often these reports it's difficult to write a report that even makes any sense to someone who's not involved in software development about software development, because often you don't have an achievement. A lot of software doesn't result in an immediate achievement. It's some kind of low-level things you're working on that aren't even perceptible as a thing to the end user. And let's put it this way, to just go how extreme this can be. When I was working on BitShares, and I was the primary software developer for it early on, and the guy who was running the project, Dan Larimer, he asked me to write a report every day. And I'm like, that's crazy. I can't write a report every day that's going to mean anything to anyone. So
So one of the suggestions that was made was about every 3 months.
Yeah, I think that's great. And, if we can get people behind, if you can get the proposers to promise things like that, that's something useful. It's like reporting, while important, is not the most important thing, to be honest, at the end. I mean, the most important thing really at the end is that you want them to deliver something that's useful. And the thing a lot of people don't understand when they're, at least in my opinion, when they're talking about proposals, is proposals are not like measuring a business that's been operating in a for-profit business that's been operating profitably. There's two kind of businesses when you look in the business world. There's like startups, and there's like, an existing business. And so proposals are very much like startups in the sense that they're high risk, high chance of failure. There's a good chance that when somebody tries to write a new piece of software, they will fail to do it. And software is really hard in that sense. The more experienced they are, the more likely they are to succeed, but still can be failures. And there have been dramatic failures of software by major companies that, been around for years in the commercial world, for instance. So you kind of that's why I kind of think we should spend a fair amount in the DHF, is because we're going to have failures, but we can also have big successes. And so it's like every proposal is it's like an entrepreneurial business startup. You're spending money. There's a good chance of failure, but you're hoping that one of these will hit big and you'll come up with a good result. But when you're trying to measure like small amounts, so like, we're going to get this much return, you talk about 10% return or something like that. Those kind of numbers don't make any sense when you're looking at startups. Those kind of numbers only make sense for an existing business where it's all very predictable.
Okay, I've got 3 other questions here. Actually, 4 other questions, but I'm not sure about the one. When smart contracts was asked?
Well, we've been working on the technology for smart contracts for roughly 4 or 5 years now. So I guess it's 4 plus. So it's getting closer. That's what I can tell you. We've built a lot of the base technology for it. All the stuff we've done in half has been based on developing it. We are, in fact, at the stage where we're now speccing out the higher level pieces for smart contracts. So one of the things we're doing different in our smart contracts is it's completely a second layer smart contract system. And that was one of the things from the start I wanted to do. I wanted to get it out of the core code for a lot of different reasons I've talked about elsewhere. But we've been making a lot of progress that, again, won't be seen by anybody that's not following very closely the low level what we're doing. A lot of making a smart contract system is about making a very efficient smart contract system, also making one that's easy to write and debug and catch problems, because one of the big problems with smart contracts is once they're running, and they can have, if you have bugs in them, they can be disastrous. So a lot of things we've been working on is how to avoid those kind of problems, how to make it easier for programmers to work with them, and also how to make them very efficient, because another problem we saw with smart contracts is they can often take down the core code with just slowing it down to a crawl because of inefficiencies that could be exposed when you allow somebody to run somewhat semi-arbitrary code inside the blockchain itself. And even outside the blockchain, even the second layer, you don't want one smart contract to be impacting the other smart contracts just because it's slow. So you run into these kind of things. And we've been developing the software that avoids these problems, but it just takes a lot of time. I really hope we'll have the smart contracts done this year. The next big piece that we're doing is we're developing what I call light accounts. But light accounts is more than just light accounts. It's also second layer transactions. So a transaction is when you have a bunch of operations that either all succeed or fail at once. And we have transactions inside the first layer, but we don't have an equivalent concept inside the second layer yet. So we're developing that for the smart contract system and for other second layer smart contract systems too. So that basic technology will be used by even competing second layer smart contract systems.
I'm kind of hearing that we could have smart contracts soon, or we could have them that they work well and don't break the chain.
Yeah.
And there was a question, will there be fees on the smart contract, or is that a little too soon to ask?
It's a good question. I initially have always conceived there would be fees, and I think that's probably still going to be the case, but it's probably the way we're designing the smart contract system itself is sort of that it can be sort of almost forkable, which means that inside still run. So basically you could potentially fork and run multiple copies of the second layer contract system on Hive, and you could have competing versions of that software. So one might have fees and one might not, for instance, possibly.
Points, I saw your mic flash there, so you go ahead and then I'll return to these questions.
Yeah, I was just coughing, but yeah, I have a question. So, and this is a question that is obviously from a person who's not a coder, but it was something that came up in a show the other day, and it touches into some of the stuff we're talking about. So this idea of if you have a great idea, and somebody was like, well, then you have to be able to code it. Ideas are pointless with a blockchain unless you can code it. And so, I'm just kind of interested to hear your point of view on this, because me as a non-coder, as just a user of Hive, it doesn't say if we put this into the DHF, like I don't understand. And maybe you could elucidate. I don't get why something would need to be coded for a change to the DHF. I don't see why you couldn't have certain parameters that were just expectations to happen. Like,
oh yeah, you're right, 100%. So I was said this earlier. The 3 month reporting rule. You don't need to code anything for that. You just got to convince voters that they're only going to vote for things that get a proposal every 3 months. Get a report every 3 months. It's as simple as that. There's literally it shouldn't be coded because, first of all, it's kind of arbitrary and it might change and people have different opinions after see it working for a while. What happens if we make everybody report once every 3 months and then it turns out, well, we want it to be 1 month, or what do we want it? We want it to be, once a year. So, things like that should not be coded, in my opinion. I think that's a bad move. But so what you're talking about is just persuading voters to set certain standards. That's all you're talking about, and I think that's perfectly available now, right? If you could probably, and you don't even have to be a big stakeholder. You could literally just go talk to all the big stakeholders and say, look, we need to get people to report more often. Let's get together, come up with an agreement on what we think, how often they should report, and let's try to convince all the proposal guys to do that.
Yeah, it kind of sometimes feels like the DHF is like a one size fits all, but there's different elements and different things, and so
well, that's a good point, right? What you just said, that means you could convince, say, this project is a high risk proposal and they're going to be spending a lot of money quickly. Let's have them report, weekly on how often they're spending, because they're spending a lot of money quickly and we need to know what's happening. All those things, I think, a one size fits all is not a good approach to most work. How often you should have the reporting, what the type of the reporting is. All these things could be negotiated by stakeholders and the developers or proposal makers when the proposals are put up there. There could be discussions like this, and you could. I think if these were put out as requests and then like I said, I think you're generally going to have more impact if you convince big voters of these things, because they're naturally the ones that a lot of the proposal guys are looking at very closely as the other big. But if you get a bunch of those guys to agree that this particular proposal needs more of something, you can negotiate with the proposal makers. And it's been done. It's not that this doesn't happen. It's not very visible a lot of times because it isn't always done on chain. But sometimes it is, for that matter, too. People will complain about something, or they'll unvote something for some reason, and then there will be a change in the proposal. The proposal price may be lowered. More things may be promised to be open sourced. So these kind of negotiations do actually take place. I don't know how much people really follow it to see it, but they do to some extent. But if people think more needs to take place, the solution is, to make you write about the proposals when they're made. There is a post on every proposal that's made, so it's a great place to begin such conversations. And then you can literally sort of campaign, if you want, to contact stakeholders and say, look, I don't think you should vote for this unless they do this as well, or less, something, whatever. All that's possible and doesn't require code.
So what I'm hearing is that in a way we could create a type of like committee that had influential, high stake voters who could create a handful of these parameters and then more target individually, like proposal by proposal, and what would be the expectation of that proposal, and then if they don't meet those parameters, those expectations, then that same committee or stakeholders would unvote and they would lose their funding.
Yeah, absolutely.
Well, good. I'm glad that I don't have to learn coding.
Yeah, it would literally be a bad idea to code this kind of thing, because you don't know what it's really going to work best, and you don't want to keep changing your code all the time. And like I said, it's not a one-size-fits-all on proposals either.
Do you, Shadow, do you have more questions you want to ask from the audience dealing with the DHF? I have more questions, but I don't want to hog it if there's other.
There's one more here for related to the DHF. Spirit Surge asked, back in October 2024 in Blocktrades talked about starting a program for software development similar to Value Plan funded by the DHF. Is that still the plan?
So at some point, I mentioned already that I spend more than the entire DHF on Hive. And that won't continue forever, honestly. So at some point, I plan on... So I basically run a company here, and then it pays contractors overseas. So most of my developers are overseas contractors, which also means we get more bang for the buck in general, as you can probably imagine. There'll certainly come a day when I will no longer be funding that out of my pocket. So there will be a day when that's a DHF proposal. And so that's kind of was what my view for this was, that group, they know how to hire people. They have a lot of experience. And basically, the kind of group you're talking about, a bunch of people who are high stake voters would be sort of overseeing that group's development. So the only problem I have with that is so that's going to happen for sure. And so that's kind of the way I've seen this happening, is they would be able to, then people could apply to them to do work remotely and things like that. But it doesn't mean that it couldn't be another one that does the same thing too, right? We could have two such companies. And so I think Voltex talked about doing one too. I think it takes a little experience to run a company like that, to be honest, because you have to have if you're going to hire developers, you have to know how to manage them and things like that to a certain extent. And this only takes time, and experience. So I know the team that I've got is really good at that. They've been hiring people for a long time, and I don't directly do the hiring there. And I know they do a good job.
So there's two questions here that maybe this is a good time to ask both of them. Aloha and Ed would like to hear what you are working on right now and what you think would help grow Hive. And Rihanna Webb would like to know where we can check what's being developed on Hive and the future of the blockchain tech. Is there a roadmap for Hive?
Okay, so if you want to know where the development's being done, it's actually done in several repos, but most of the work I'm involved in is all done on what's called gitlab.syncad.com website. And so you can go there and see literally everything we're doing for the largest extent. I mean, you can't see things like when we're doing testing and stuff like that, but all the code changes we make. And if you go there, you'll see there's, like, I'm looking right now at that main page because I'm constantly staring at that page, as it turns out. And I can see like probably 15 or 16 projects that have been code changes have been made to today. That's just normal.
Can you name that page again, or drop it in the chat?
Sure, I'll drop it into the. Is it okay to voice general chat? Is that where I drop it?
Yes, voice channel.
Okay, so if you click on that, you'll just see it's basically showing activity that's going on right now. And you can see that like one of the projects had an edit 19 minutes ago. So there's literally, while we're having this conversation, there are people making changes to the code.
And what you're working on right now?
So right now, I'm actually, today, after this, I think I'm going to be ready to finally release a new version of everything. So I plan to do it. I actually released one like 2 weeks ago, but I found some problems with it, so I didn't make a public announcement. And I worked through the problems this weekend, and so I've just been testing it. And so, and then I spent another day or so just getting it all tagged and put together. So today, I hopefully will be releasing 1.27.10 of basically what I call it's called these API servers. These are the servers that run all the code that like all the websites use to get information about Hive from. And this is the update to that. So it's mostly been a lot of performance improvements and also a bunch of new functions and API calls that people can make. So new ways that people can get data from the blockchain.
What do you think will help grow Hive and then back to Bitcoin?
So growing Hive, that's a big subject. There's lots of different things. So, I mean, one that's always been on my mind and very obvious, I think, is smart contracts. That's kind of one of the biggest ones. Efficiency is another really big one. People often don't realize it, but if you want to have a decentralized system, you really need something that's not so expensive to run. So, because it's like, well, look at AI right now. AI is extremely non-decentralized for a large part because it costs so much to run those servers. And so for Hive, if we're going to be a decentralized system, we need a very low-cost system that basically anyone can run. And that's been it wasn't really, when we started, the code really wasn't amenable to that kind of running. Steemit was spending money just to keep all those servers running. So one of the things we've always been doing this whole time is figuring out how to lower the cost of operating the system to where it can be truly decentralized. So that's another big thing. So that's also sometimes known as scalability, which means, we want to be able to add lots and lots more users and still be able to handle the traffic, and not have the servers get overwhelmed in one way or the other. So those two things I think are really important. One brings new capabilities. The smart contracts bring more capabilities. The scaling allows us to add a lot more users. So if we might have the most interesting tech in the world, but if it's not scalable, it really will never get true traction. It's kind of like the issue that we talk about sometimes, like retention, right? It's sort of another version of that. We might be if we onboarded a million people, but then immediately got bored and left a few days later because it was not fun or it was too slow or whatever, then it really wouldn't be successful. So scaling is something that's not very sexy, but it's really basically important if you actually want to succeed.
That makes sense. Bitcoins?
Right. And so, yeah, this kind of, retention touches into this next thing that I want to get into. For me, coming from a community-minded aspect, there's this kind of idea that I hear in different forms that Hive is decentralized and our greatest strength is our community. And that, even our name, the hive mind, the collective intelligence is where we can garner our strength, and we need to leverage that. And I obviously see that there's quite a lot of truth behind that. But something that I've noticed through the years is I see users with really great ideas, and it seems interesting, seems thoughtful, and then it just sort of dissipates. This week alone, there was 2 or 3 posts that I saw that just have amazing ideas that I'm just like, why did that not get seen, or how do you get these ideas seen? And so I guess sometimes I feel like maybe aspects of the community get frustrated, and I'm not going to say that this is the main source of lack of retention, but I think some people just feel their voice isn't heard. And so I'm curious, if you have any ideas or anything is being worked on where there could be mechanisms to kind of gather these community ideas and have maybe some of them come to fruition.
Yeah, I can take that question.
Yeah, go for it.
So, first of all, I'd say that people probably don't realize, but most of those ideas probably do get seen more than they think. A lot of times, their ideas aren't as new as, of course, people think they're either. Because, we've got if you count Steemit and Hive history together, I don't know how many years it is now, but 7 or 8, right? It's been a long, long time. So a lot of ideas have been mentioned over time, and a lot of people think they have a new idea, and it turns out it's just some idea that's been had before. But that doesn't say they aren't new ideas, of course. One of the problems, I guess, that in terms of you saying people don't feel like they get recognized, well, yeah, maybe they aren't getting recognized. They might also be getting recognized, and maybe people aren't just replying. So it may just be a feedback mechanism where we're not giving sufficient feedback to those ideas. Because, even if somebody's got an idea that's been already suggested in the past, it just pays to acknowledge them and let them know that they've, it's a good idea, or it's an idea that we thought about, and here's why we didn't do it, or it's more troublesome than it seems. And I think having people step in and do that kind of thing is good. And maybe I'm probably guilty of not often doing that. I'll see an idea and I'm like, oh yeah, we know about that, but it's not so easy, or it's not as good as you might think because of this, right? These things come up all the time. And I honestly don't answer a lot of them myself personally, and maybe I should do more. I don't know. But other people I at least hope will step in too, and because I'm not the only one that sees an idea that's been suggested before. But on the other side, there could be ideas that I simply don't see, for instance, or other people don't see. And we know posts get unseen. No, some posts never get seen. But I mean, a lot of times the system for getting information to, developers is probably better than people think, because even if developers aren't necessarily commenting on them, there are people that are contacting developers and say, this looks like a good idea. I get people send me links about things they think are interesting all the time. So, and I don't necessarily, like I said, I don't always comment on the post as a result, I'll be honest. And I'm just saying me as one person. Obviously, there's lots of different people that this happens to, I'm sure. So maybe in general, all our developers and all our people who could make some of these things happen should be a little more responsive on those kind of ideas, I guess. Now, on the other hand, you talked about where we just literally don't see the idea at all. And yeah, of course, that's got to happen, I'm sure, too. And maybe even some good ideas. I tend to think good ideas wind up making it to me a lot of times, but I'm sure not all of them do. Sometimes I see some project going on and I just have to find out about it because I just wasn't paying attention to it or didn't hear about it for a long time. But that process of discovery, yeah, I think that's a very important issue. So there's a twofold answer to that. First of all, we are developing some technology for semantic searching, which is basically using tools similar to what's done in some of the AI stuff. And so we will have semantic search, I hope, this year, and that would allow for being easier to discover these kind of things. Separately, as I mentioned, I've got another project that I've been working on for quite a long time, which is involved in voting and organized decision-making. And another part of that is, in fact, better discovery of ideas, better discovery of things that are of interest to people. Basically, it's like an advanced filtering system where you can each user be able to filter information in different ways to find what they're looking for. And people can then rate that. So you can find, basically it's like a rating system too. So people can rate ideas as being interesting or not interesting to them in different areas. So kind of a new way to discover people's ideas and make them known to other people. So that technology, while it's separate from Hive, I think Hive could certainly benefit from it once it's developed. And you had a second question, maybe I've forgotten the one. I was kind of answering the two parts of the first one, I think. Yeah,
I think you pretty much covered what I was asking. I think so. I kind of want to just ask one really specific question, and this was from a post this week, and I think it is an idea that had been had, but I'm kind of curious to hear your opinion on it. So the post was talking about like if you are a big stakeholder, that you should have more sway, and you should
you only have 100% vote on things.
Yeah, exactly.
It's not a new idea. I've seen it. I've seen it a bunch of times over time.
So an old idea, but what do you think about that? Why isn't it?
Let's talk about the specifics of it. So that doesn't actually apply. Well, so first of all, where is it being applied? Is it being applied to the idea of, is it applied to witnesses, or is it applied to the proposal system, or applied to both? Because each one's
I would
different.
say both. I would kind of say both. Like for me, it just feels like it's it's like double, triple, quadruple the power.
From my point of view, like, it makes no sense for DHF. I'll be honest.
Okay.
In a stake voting system where you're trying to allocate funds, it seems whacked. It's completely different than you would have in any traditional, financial system where you have shareholder voting. You wouldn't say that, okay, you can only vote on one of the ways we're going to spend money, for instance, to get it done, or you can allocate a little of your vote to each of these ideas. Each proposal is a separate vote based on stake. And from my point of view, when you're spending money over an organization, that makes complete sense. Now, as a separate issue, there's this governance issue, which is how you vote for witnesses. And yeah, I think there is an argument that could be made easily for lowering the power of people to vote in witnesses to where they could basically only allocate their vote. Because here it's not a money spending thing, so it's not quite so much directly a stake based thing. So it could make more sense. But again, I don't think it's huge. I'd considered doing it at one point and kind of looked through the ramifications, positive and negative, and I just didn't see the benefit being high enough to make the change. That's not a great answer, but it's just it is better.
Fair enough. It just like interests me because like when I just read it and when I see a little bit of the disparity that was brought up in the post, the like how it compounds the strength of a large whale, like it makes you think. And so yeah, it's interesting to hear your response.
But it literally just the traditional way we always have done voting in stake-based systems is on a proposal system. Now, the thing is that the witness thing isn't really the same kind of thing exactly, because you're not spending money, and you could argue that in that case, you just don't want to give somebody too much control over the chain itself.
There's a question here. Cold Beetroot Soup has asked, what about having another DHF only for smaller projects, to which somebody has helpfully suggested we call it the rookie DHF?
So, yeah, it could, but you could probably do that now, right? You could almost, it's like we talked about, you could have a proposal that someone's managing, and you could have people who could basically be voters in that system. So the managers could have a voting system, right? They could have an informal, you don't even need software is what I guess I'm saying for something like this. You could literally have a group of people that say, we want to manage software projects. We're experienced software managers, and we're going to vote on proposals, on ideas that we will develop. This is, Vaultek's proposal essentially. And we're going to use this mechanism for doing our voting. So it doesn't have to be a blockchain-based voting system. You could. So, but if you're going to make it a blockchain, you'd need to get specifics. What's going to be different about it? If you need a software change, what's going to be different about it? What's going to be the advantage of it that you can't do without changing the software?
Yeah, there's a lot to take in when suggestions get made, isn't there?
Yeah, especially when it involves software. Yeah. Because sometimes these software changes seem simple and sometimes they are, but there's always unexpected problems that can arise. I don't like changing the base protocol much at all.
Final thoughts, Bitcoin?
Well, this is a super broad question that I don't expect you to solve, but so just when we look at decentralization, so Hive, I when I'm out there in the world, I often say, I've only really encountered Hive and Bitcoin. I don't see I'm sure there are a handful of others, maybe Monero I've heard arguments for, and a few, but decentralization, at its core, and we see it all the time on the blockchain, it's inefficient. And here, especially on Hive, we just get this sea of pictures and complainers and ideas, and we just kind of seem to flounder in this sea of opinions. And so I'm just curious, how do we as a chain be decentralized but still have leadership and clear vision and moving forward effectively? How do you balance the chaos of everybody's opinion and then simultaneously be effective and move with clarity?
So it's a great question in terms of it's my main interest nowadays, and that's the other project I'm working on. Is a solution to that very problem you described. First of all, I should say that I don't think there's inherently anything inefficient about decentralization. I know a lot of people think that's true, but I don't think that's particularly true. There are certain aspects to things that can be inefficient about decentralization, but I think decentralization also has a lot of big advantages. So I think ultimately decentralization of everything is kind of where we're going because it has advantages, not just because we want it, but because it's actually beneficial. But that's a big topic, and explaining that isn't one I can do in a couple minutes either. In terms of the things you talked about ideas and being able to find ideas and be able to have leadership, those are all very much focused on that project too. First of all, I think diversity of opinion is super important, and that's where this project is really focused, is how to collect diversified opinions, how to not avoid discouraging them, how to give them, in other words, room to be heard and discussed, and still rejected if they don't make sense, and how to do all that efficiently. That's really where a lot of that project's focused on, and then going forward beyond that, then how to make decisions based on those ideas and the information that's been collected. So all that, a really big topic. I've been spending years on it. I've got multiple people working on the topic. So I can't answer that in 5 minutes either.
With that, I want to thank you for giving us an hour of your time today, and I think we've covered a lot of ground. You're very interesting to listen to. It must almost be scary being in your head with all those ideas bouncing around, because we heard a lot of them today, and we'd love to have you back at another time.
Sure,
but that possibility.
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome. So with what, thank you for being here. Thank our guests for coming out and supporting us today as we get started. We will be back next week. Buckcoins, I think you were talking to a guest for next week?
I asked Lord Butterfly. I don't know if he's in the audience. I'm not seeing the audience list, but I did ask him, and he gave me a big fat maybe. So we will announce. Yeah, thanks so much, Blocktrades. I really appreciate it. It's great to have a coder that can speak in a very like I don't know. Yeah, I feel like you're very listenable.
He speaks like a human instead of a coder. How's that?
Yeah, exactly.
Well, I'm a human first, coder second.
Thank God. All right, with that, we end the show.